So what I thought I'd start with is the sort of the reminder bit. I kind of could do with this a lot of the time. I'm not going to do the intro bit, by the way. I was going to do about, you know, demand and so forth. It's like, I think you know that, and you've been doing quite a lot of it at this event already. So we are very conscious, though, I should say, of the context that this is happening in at the moment. Because when we started out 4 years ago, it was a different kind of landscape, different kind of demand, different pattern going on out there in policing. And right now, we are hearing and listening to the pain that people are talking about, and we are doing on our side what we can do to talk to the various different national stakeholders, talk to government and think about what do we need to do here really to make sure that we carry on with this journey that people seem to be brought into, broadly speaking, but we understand and think about what's the collected impact of trying to do this kind of change and what can we do about that. So we might come back to that later on because there's a few different elements, but I'm not going to do the sort of the whole demand piece because that's stuff you know very well indeed. But I thought I'd just start with the building block stuff and just a bit of a stock take of where we are on the building block. So we started off with our code of ethics. The core, the heart of this, I think, is taking professional development seriously, because I think that's something that we haven't really done as a kind of group of collective professionals over time. It's sort of something it's one day here and there. It's not something that's right at the heart of what we are as a profession, and giving it a bit of muscle, giving it as much muscle as some of the other things in the landscape. So there's more to say about that professional development bit. The building up the evidence base and having that as a core underpinning, the knowledge base on which we base our action. And I think the really exciting bit, the bit that really gets me going, and of course it would because that's what my kind of background is, but is where people take this on and they make it theirs. It's not somebody else's research evidence, it's not somebody else doing research in a box somewhere or in a university or an ivory tower. It's actually their stuff. They know it, they own it, and they build it up. We started out sort of maybe 2-3 years ago, we did something called evidence-based camp, which was getting officers and staff together to try out reviewing the evidence, research evidence for themselves, academic papers, right? To have a go at it and see what they thought of going through that process and coming to what do all these papers say about a topic. We picked ones that were interesting for national policing leads. So there was one on prostitution, there was one on black and minority ethnic groups and their progression in the service, and a couple of others. So we got people actually doing it. And what was fascinating was within a really short space of time, people who'd never done any study themselves, didn't have qualifications, were saying, do you know what, some of this stuff is not actually very good. I could do better than this. It's like, yeah, you probably could, because this is your stuff. And when you have the skills and knowledge to apply to this kind of activity, it's very likely you could do quite a lot better and add to an evidence base that matters for your profession, because you can be much more targeted about it. And the other thing that it does, I think, is when people have that experience, they see that it's not some kind of airy-fairy academic other thing going on in a cupboard somewhere that's nothing to do with them and full of people spouting long words and just nonsense. It can be really practical, really applied, and actually about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think that was a tiny little example, but it really opened my eyes up to what a difference it can make. People saying, I never thought this could be for me. I didn't think I could do like academic study, but actually I can do this. And part of it, I think, is because some of the shared things that, I'm looking at Joan, who's got a research background, some of the shared things between researchers and police officers, funnily enough, nosiness, really nosy, a lot of them, about what's going on, finding out more what's going on behind the scenes, interested in causes, really critical in their thinking, really good at analysing, and all of that, those kinds of pieces, actually where we started, as I was saying in the main hall a minute ago, in terms of why we ever ended up suggesting that level of qualification was where it should be. It wasn't really from going to the qualifications and saying which one of these in the book should we pull out. It was looking at what police officers actually do and then thinking about what kind of qualification fits that. So it's the other way round. And I think that kind of building up for me, if we get it right, the connection between that and that, so that your professional development is driving how you build the evidence base. what you do when you do your professional development is test new things. You build up the evidence base. That, I think, will be massive in terms of changing the whole way policing builds up its sort of standards and its approach to professional practice overall. And this, hopefully, can be a sort of a core kind of underpinning of all of that, because it gives the kind of common framework. We have curriculums that are set out for people with the right types of skills and knowledge that give them the underpinning, if you like, but then it's up to them to choose the things that they really care about, to do that next bit, to do a test themselves. And thinking about how it might work, I'll just do a tiny bit on this, but thinking about how this might work for an individual police officer at master's level. The reason there, again, for the master's level is not because we went, what qualifications should we pull out of the cupboard? It's because if you read the descriptions of what police officers are expected to do and think about what superintending level officers do, they take difficult, complex problems and they try to think about what you were telling me earlier, so new and innovative ways of dealing with those. They marshal resources around that to try to tackle these new problems. They test the result. Used to be, of course, it would say that they would always succeed. These days, of course, much more rigorous. They test the result, work out whether or not that is delivering what they thought it would deliver, and then that can be added to the sort of national evidence base, if we're sharing good practice properly, of course, which I'll come back to. But that kind of activity is what superintendents do. That's what it says in a level 7 qualification. That's pretty much the description. So it's a kind of combination of respecting what's there in terms of the activity that they're doing, but also trying to add to that more of the kind of support in terms of skills and knowledge that you could get to be people that are adding to the evidence base for policing. So there is something a bit more. There's something about what it gives to you as an individual, but also something about how you're then building up the evidence base for the profession. And I think that's something that most police officers, when they see what that can achieve, are interested in and want to do, because it changes the national game. And can change policy and what government wants to do as a result. Connected to that then, the sort of building up of the evidence base bit, we're doing some pilots at the moment. This is a bit like the evidence base camp stuff I was doing. It's the next stage of that. So doing guidelines in a slightly different way, where we're trying to be much more strict, if you like, about being clear about what's the evidence that's in the guidelines. Does this have formal research evidence to support it or not? Or is it mostly based on professional consensus and teasing out issues from groups of collected officers and staff? So we're doing some pilots on that. The officer safety one is focused a lot on de-escalation techniques, so how you can de-escalate scenarios, potentially violent scenarios. Some really interesting research stuff there about what seems to work in terms of de-escalation. Initial accounts, so that's about interviewing techniques, getting good initial accounts, getting some good evidence there from quite a decent evidence base in that territory. And then the new one, and this relates to what you were saying about neighbourhood policing. So this is quite, I don't know if you've seen the call for practice that's gone out on this. Yeah, so we're doing both things there. So reviewing the evidence base as it is now, but also asking out there, and if you've got some, please do look for the call for practice from Paul Quinton put it out on Twitter, getting calls for practice on what are people doing right now in sort of neighbourhood policing in the modern world, if you like. So not just some of the interventions that are done in sort of geographic sense, in place-based, but also are people doing clever things in neighbourhood policing in technological space, if you like, because we've heard of a few examples, but we're looking for more of that. And that guideline group, so there'll be a committee there, collected group of people, police officers and staff, academics, external independent people, wrestling together with what should we set as the recommendation. And the reason why we're putting so much effort into that and trying to do that in a really careful way is we want consensus then that what comes out of that gets inspected and people actually want to achieve the standard. Because the problem we've got at the moment, and you will be victims of this, I think, some of you, is that authorised professional practice has got a lot in it, I mean, you know, it's pages and pages of stuff. It's not always clear to HMIC which bits of that should be inspected against and which are just interesting. So there are things for people to share, but you're not expected to meet a standard. So it tends to be that a lot of what's out there, if it's written down, is treated as if it should be achieved, and then it works its way into inspection processes and review processes and stuff, and everything becomes a standard that's tested. We want to be much clearer about where there's a national consensus that X should be done, so we can concentrate some energy and focus on some of the bits that are more important. We think that shift is probably quite important. And then in terms of membership, I thought I'd put this up there with some of the things we're trying to do at the moment in membership. We've got 20,000, I think it is now. We've just reached 20,000 members. If you think about the scale of police officers and staff out there and the 20,000, these are the what you might call early adopters in innovation territory. You know, they're the sort of the keen, the people who like to try new things, the people who are interested already in this, building up the evidence base, being part of a profession. So they're not the hardcore, if you like. They're the people who are really experimental, I suppose, a lot of the people who are joining us. And what we're trying to do with them is give them access to a few extra things that we can provide in the membership, on the membership platform, so that people start to be encouraged to come, because you can get things there that we won't provide elsewhere. So this is an example of college knowledge stuff. We just thought, actually, do you know what? We've got a lot of good stuff on body-worn video, on pre-charge bail, on stop and search, on a lot of like really common issues of interest for officers and staff. And we don't even share it all in one place. I mean, it's a bit of a nightmare trying to find out. You have to go on 4 different platforms to get it. In the future, we'll have a marvellous digital solution for all of this. It'll be really easy. But for now, we're trying to do it in a really basic way. So starting by bringing together those sources of information just in one place. So it's just one example. There's also stuff on there about career development. There's opportunities to access sort of CPD, work shadowing, various different kinds of opportunities. But it's all focused around professional development, and learning. It's focused on people being able to add to the evidence base and get involved in that. So the college bursary scheme is another recent example. People being able to apply for bursaries to support them in their studies, where they're keen to add to the evidence base and they want to be part of the sort of evidence-based policing activity. So that's a sort of overview of the kind of the underpinnings bit. I thought I'd say a little bit about the Knowledge Fund. So we're also trying to do a lot of partnership stuff, and we've managed to persuade the Higher Education Funding Council and the Home Office, and we're doing more of this, trying to persuade people. Oh, that was exciting. Hello. So to invest in our sector, because before a couple of years ago there was no real money coming in from academia into our world. It's just a historical thing partly, but we're not a big enough beast in some ways. Education and health, there's quite a lot of money goes in to the universities for those, but there was kind of a bit of a drought in our sector. So we kind of made an argument with HEFCE and the Home Office that we needed to do something about that, to show that actually our sector's really a fantastic place to operate, can do really amazing things and acts fast, which is quite appealing, of course, in terms of actually getting some stuff done. So the Knowledge Fund, that was 10 million. It was used for university and force partnerships, but to get it, they had to give a commitment and tell us what they would do for frontline officers and staff as part of the activity that they were doing. How would they make a difference in that partnership? How would it be applied? And we're getting these stories out now. So this is just coming up to the end of the 2 years, stories of the individual officers and staff that have been affected. This is obviously just one of them, but it's really exciting because it actually does seem to be working, in that when people get these opportunities to, this is quite a short piece, the thing that he went on, I think it was just like a 2-day programme. There have been research fellowships, some people just go to one seminar, but it's giving people some of that investment of time and interest and giving them the opportunities. It's showing them, again, it's this same message that this isn't something else that's nothing to do with them, this is for them and they can do it. And there's also, Simon mentioned the Centre for Expertise, some really good topic-based stuff going on, so some really interesting developments around cyber, some good geeky stuff on how you analyse social webs and can use those to inform your policing activity. So there's loads of material there. We're starting to put that into comms packages that we can send out and share with people. If you'd like to know more about any of that, I'd be very happy to take kind of names and contacts, because there's quite a lot going on there. And the other thing we've been doing is trying to make the case for more of this, not from taking resources from the service, but from getting access to other resources that aren't being spent. Hence the sort of academia stuff. But this story, there's a really strong and getting stronger evidence base about the value that continuing professional development can have for outcomes for the public, actually. And there's quite a bit in health. There's quite a lot in health. There's a bit in childcare, a bit less in education, and a bit less again in policing. But it's building up to be quite a promising evidence base in terms of saying, put money into this, you will get the investment back. You can see the difference in terms of outcomes for the public. Sometimes that can be quite narrow, like a really specific intervention to get people to do something, or it can be a much more general bit of professional development, but you can see the outcome stuff coming out. So we're trying to use that to make stronger arguments with ministers and with others who fund, so research councils and sponsors and people like that. This will look very familiar to you, but it's also something we've got in our minds for a particular reason. So given the number of officers that have been lost and the turnover, what we think is really interesting is if you look at what will happen in terms of the length of service profiles, that's 0 to 5 years and 25 to 30 years up here. So in 2032, with all the changes, we're going to have quite a big chunk of people that are up this end who've been in the service for a long time, and we want to make sure that those people get as much investment in their professional development as we can, because we think they're going to be an absolutely core group. We've got, as new joiners come in, they'll be taking part in some of the new types of learning and training that are going on, but that group we think are absolutely critical. We need to make sure we keep attention on them right the way through their careers and get them the sort of attention they deserve. And I think there's something here, going back to the questions you were asking about levels and ranks and so forth. I think they deserve development of quite a significant kind, not in promotion terms necessarily, but in terms of going back to that CPD point, the more we invest in their professional development, the more they will be able to give back to the public. And that argument we've got to keep making and keep giving examples of. And I think that it's not just, you know, qualification because it looks nice on a piece of paper. It's because it can actually give results that we care about it. So we're also doing trying to give that sort of underpinning to all of this, the profiles. You're going to have a closed session, I think, talking about the education qualification framework and about professional profiles. There'll be quite a lot of detail in that. Dan Murphy's going to do that with you. But if you want to ask questions or talk anything about that right now, I'm very happy to do that, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it because I know you've got a special session. But one of the things I did want to say was we're doing that underpinning to try and be clear about what, and you can, you know, remain unconvinced, I understand that, but to understand what we think should be the underpinning of each kind of chunk of policing. What should we be, where should you be recognised, and what level does it feel like you should have your qualification pitched? And on the education qualifications framework, we're looking at the moment at the timing on when to bring in the different levels and when to make those mandatory, and what would be the transition. So who will get affected as this shifts? And there's some specific points for superintendents who would want to go for chief officer, for example, and what effect that might have. So there's some detail there that we can get into. But I just thought I'd flag this to you because I think the team have done a fantastic job with this, usually with recognition of prior learning. So sort of being able to use your current professional experience and expertise to be recognised for academic credits. It's done on an individual basis. Each person has to go and have it done with their university. What the team have done is worked with a group of higher education providers to build a model that will work generally for policing. I mean, there'll be exceptions because some of you might have done some sort of really niche extra course or something special that hasn't been recognised, but basically what they've done is to create a sort of credit calculator. So people at all levels and whatever roles and ranks they're in, can put their experience and expertise in and get a good idea of how that can be recognised and how many credits it can give them to take a flying leap into a qualification if they want to do one. So if you're the person who's constable now, not interested in promotion, never want to get promoted, want to be a constable for all your service, but actually you think, well, you know, I'm quite interested in having the opportunity to do some more professional development, get a qualification for myself. You can then put in your experience and expertise so far, see what that gives back in credit, and get an understanding of what the top up would be. So even for, yeah, go for it, yeah.
So two very tactical questions.
Yeah, tactical is good, it's fine.
I'm Will from Staffordshire.
Yeah.
Firstly, has the college factored in what the abstraction will look like?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We've discussed the pressure demand.
Yep.
And whilst I support this as a way forward, it will require an abstraction from normal duty
Yeah.
for potentially a significant part of the organisation.
Yeah.
And secondly, who's paying for it?
So, both good questions. So in terms of the first one on the abstraction, so we're right in the process at the moment of having this careful teasing out with MPCC about how the model will work in practice. So, first part of it, the recognition of prior learning means there's an element of this which you've already done because you're as part of your work. The second part of it is this will depend, I think, a bit on whether it's voluntary for people or whether they're doing it as part of their promotion. So it will only be mandatory for people who are going into a new role. So let's say you go from sergeant to inspector. When you become an inspector, you will do a programme while you are being an inspector. And the abstraction point, there's some real fine detail here about what would be, so a lot of it you will do which is work-based, so you'll be doing it anyway, it's part of your apprenticeship in that role, it's a work-based activity. And then there's an element which would be probably, and this is again, you know, detail to be teased out, but some kind of project or thesis in academic language or dissertation that you would do. Now, the key bit for this is to make sure that those pieces of work are A, done on things which both the individual and the organisation want to be done. So it's things that you're already doing in your working life change projects or things that are already part of what you're doing. And then it's about thinking about, right, what is the bit where really this is abstraction? What amount of time are we talking about? Is there space now for that to happen? Most people would say no. So if that's the case and we think this has to happen, then the arguments that we're going to be having are with Treasury, and they are with working with people like Dave Thompson from the Finance Committee about exactly what do we think the marginal difference is here and arguing the case for that. The bottom line was when the College Board agreed to this and said, yes, we think this is the right way forward, they wanted it to be absolutely clear that implementation had to happen, so therefore this has to be implementable, and if it isn't, then we can't proceed with it. So that's why we're doing work with MPCC right now to make sure we can be clear about what the implications are. And I think there could be a few difficult conversations out of this in terms of, I wouldn't say it's like a sweeping huge amount of additional resource, which is why I stepped you through all of those different elements. But I think there might be a factor that we have to face up to, which is saying, if you really seriously want to do this, then given the amount of demand that's been talked about this morning, we do think there's an issue and we do think it probably needs to be addressed if we're going to implement to these timeframes. Is that enough for now? Yeah, okay, really good. So I paused on that one because I think it's really important before we go to more general questions.
So
yeah.
It's been accredited by
oh yes, sorry. Yeah. So the apprenticeship model, as we're agreeing each of those apprenticeships, that funding for that comes from the levy. So that's a levy on employers already, and you draw it back from the Department for Education. So that's for the promoted ones. We're just in the process at the moment of doing quite a detailed bid, which we've taken to Police Reform and Transformation, for funds to invest in the existing workforce. to say, actually, you've got the transformation fund, we recognise the big priority for digital, recognise the big priority for specialist capabilities, but actually we think there's another big priority here, it's the existing workforce, and we think they should be invested in as well. So that's what we're pushing for at the moment. So, last couple of bits that I was going to cover. So on the licence to practice, so we've done a fair bit of consultation, discussions, engagements about this. We've had a formal consultation document, but also done lots of engagement. You will all know, because the people that are here in this room will all know, again, in principle, people think this is the right thing to do, to try to make sure that people are prepared for a new role before they go into it and are given the right kind of CPD and support. People's concerns are, again, very similar issues to what a colleague was just saying, are about the extent to which you could reduce flexibility, so people not being able to move around fast enough in the system if you introduce things like this, and that what's the extra demand on the individual? So what potential extra effort do they have to put in order to meet these kinds of standards? It is a tricky balance, this one, but I think there is something we can do around what they do when they first go into, prior to going into a role. So how much could you do on self-directed learning, to use the jargon, but just to give people a basic level, and then how much would be work-based once they're in role? So it's much more about a network of peer support. It's about events that you would go to within the course of the year, and having a sort of package of CPD activity that keeps you to the level, and much less about massive great learning programme that goes on for 2 weeks and you're expected to redo it every year. It's not that kind of an approach. Very much focused on picking out, teasing out what is the high risk element of these roles, and what's the bit therefore that you really want to be prepared for when you go into it. So a guy called Paul Clements, as I mentioned in the hall earlier, is, because he was in this situation himself, is quite passionate about what you would want to put into a licence to practice, and has stepped forward to volunteer with a couple of colleagues he's found elsewhere in the country, also superintendents, to say, how should this be designed? So that's brilliant, because it means they will do the real thinking here about how can this be practical and feasible for superintendents. So we are developing that as we go along, basically. That's the next stage of that's just about to start. And then finally, no, not finally, sorry, there's two more. Little bit of a focus on welfare, so working with Steve, who's in the room here, and with Gavin, and with other colleagues, just on putting the case around investing in something national on welfare. What's the gap is what we're looking at the moment, so scoping carefully what's the real gap here, because lots of forces do different things, different services are provided, some of them invest lots in this, some less so. What would be the really important national gap to fill here? And we're trying to think about that in the 3 layers you would expect. So general prevention, so the sort of thing that's there for everybody who's in risky, stressful jobs in policing, which is most of them, and what would you put in place there? Next level for people who are in specialist roles where there's an ongoing wearing effect, you know, people doing investigation in child sexual abuse, that kind of thing, so really ongoing difficult experiences, and then the sort of critical incident activity as well. So, because there'll be different gaps in each of those areas. So we could say a bit more about this at that if people are interested, but I just wanted to mention that's something new that we're just focused on at the moment, trying to get the right scope for that. And then finally, just to say a little bit about the Chief Officer pipeline for those of you interested in this territory. Survey that was done a little while ago with superintendents, PCCs and chiefs, looking at what are the issues around access to Chief Officer ranks, getting enough people willing to put themselves forward, wanting to go for those roles, getting enough diversity as well. And common themes that came out, again, you're living this, so these things won't come as surprises to you, but there was a really strong theme around people's domestic circumstances and the sort of the need to move and all of those things, people having lives, funnily enough. And what I think that's a really interesting cultural thing, because it does look as if there's been a bit of a shift, that maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was an expectation somehow, and people thought they would just, you know, move their family, that there was much more of a sort of, you don't have a life. You're a police officer and you're going to be a chief officer, so that's it. So people seem to be paying far more attention actually to their family lives and their domestic circumstances, and wanting that to be part of what informs their decision making. So, but there were other things as well around financial impact, and selection processes and stuff. So we're putting in place a sort of package of things around that. What's been interesting there is some of this really basic stuff, just making sure people are aware of how these processes actually work. And again, it's sort of having the experience, like with evidence-based camp that I mentioned before. If you actually have the experience, a lot of people will find, you know, well, actually this is not as scary as I thought it would be, and I think I could have a go at this process, and come out with it with my head held high. So a lot of work being done there on awareness raising sessions, and on getting people to try things out. For underrepresented groups, a bit extra as well in terms of developmental sessions, and then also putting into place the leadership hub. So we're looking at a few different models there at the moment, of what that could be, everything from just a little bit of executive search, which used to be on some occasions Alex phoning people up, looking at all the people on the list of who's gone through the command course and doing a ring round, to doing something a bit more structured, a bit more talent management, bit more trying to help people to plan careers, to deal with some of these issues about moving around the country, and when that happens in terms of what point in people's lives that might happen. So I've covered all the things that I wanted to kind of squeeze in. I'm just going to go back to the issues that you raised before. So I think I've covered most of those, except the on the good practice one. We're building up a new sort of, it's a kind of What Works Centre Mark II, because we've got the toolkit on there already, but the next layer of that will be not to go for just interventions that have got multiple research studies and systematic reviews and all that sort of particular end, but looking at getting people to share the examples like the neighbourhood policing ones, and just having a simple way of checking that those are still ongoing, or that somebody actually, you know, is willing. Quite often we get them in, and then if you leave it even a little while and go back, they say, oh yeah, we stopped doing that. So interventions that have actually done and completed are good, rather than things that are just emerging. But just having a very simple way of sharing those, almost like as a sort of table to start off with before we try and do anything fancy. But that's one of the things we're doing right now. So yeah. So that's all the stuff I wanted to squeeze in. Interested in comments and questions now. Yes, go for it. Yeah. Yep.
I don't think there's any argument against this at all in terms of developing people, in terms of creating that parity with industry and showing that
Yeah.
you're open to a certain level. That's absolutely good. My worry comes in around basic culture of badge collecting.
Oh yeah, okay.
We don't go for a qualification, go for a course, go for any of these skills simply to attain promotion. And they see it just as that. So the ethos behind this is throwing back into the system and really growing the system and improving it is slightly lost. And then within that, just making sure that we are clear in what we're after in terms of academic ability based against operational capability.
Yep.
Because the two, in my experience, can be absolutely divorced. And the cleverest person in the world with the best qualifications can seem clueless in certain environments. People, you know, with a great operational experience can walk into a classroom and appear like a fool. But it's just making sure that we get that balance around ethos and
Yeah.
the absolute outcome.
Interesting. The badge collecting one, I think that you can create a system, I think, which discourages things, or, you know, tries to, but I think the bottom line is you can't stop that completely, I don't think. I mean, other than sort of saying you wouldn't expect people to have more than one qualification at a particular level, so it'd be a bit bonkers to, you know, have multiple masters unless they're so different, like you've done one on, I don't know, forensics and the other one on leadership and management, I suppose. So you could, yeah, you know, yeah. So I'm not sure it's easy to stop that from happening. But I think if if what you do, rather than encourage people to get more qualifications, is to do more testing, so try a new thing, and we reward that, so we have ways of recognising and rewarding people doing a new test. We've tried to put some of that through the competency framework and into senior PNAC applications, for example, that it will recognise where people are doing testing. It's not just about one single qualification, but where people are testing and adding to the evidence base. So I think that's what I would say for that one. On the on the academic capability versus operational thing, yeah, you do get the two extreme ends, and you do, I mean, you get very scholarly people, I would say. It's a little bit different to just anybody, I would argue, pretty much should be able to stretch themselves, critical thinking, you know, you can achieve more, all of us can, you know, when you're stretched and when you're thinking about greater potential. I think the academic capability, the scholarly bit is where people get really obsessed with the very, very tiny thing that's their little world, and they sort of come blinking into the light when you unearth them from there. But I don't think that's the kind of academic we're looking for. We're looking for the practical applied ones, and actually practical applied is very close to what police officers are doing. Do you see what I mean? So we've got two ends of the spectrum, but yeah. Yes, and it's the people who think they can't. Yeah. I mean, Tony's a good example, you know, and there are other people like him through the Knowledge Fund. So people who get nudged or persuaded to go to a little thing, and they go, it's kind of interesting. I always think of this grocer guy I met when I first started out. He was 50, when I met him he was 55, he was a grocer from Dundee. And his wife had gone off to do evening classes, and he'd been a bit bored, so he decided to go to some evening classes as well. By the time I met him, he was a prisons researcher and had just finished his PhD. But he would have had he said, I was just not academic at all. I hated all that stuff. I hated school. It was nothing to do with me, all the rest of it. And there he was. You know, I think it's people seriously underestimate their potential, or maybe it's not even that. Sometimes they see it as not helpful and a bad thing, when actually it's really about them achieving something to help themselves and their colleagues.
I think that's the marketing. This is about outcome.
Yeah.
Which is a very policing thing, showing the
Yeah.
outcome. The outcome is about improving service
Yeah.
and demand reduction, making it better.
Absolutely right. If we've got good stories on that, can really bring out those stories of the people that are doing it, it will make a difference, I think. Yeah, it's a good point. I had a question there. Yeah.
There's a major risk in restricting people that we're going to get into the job on, and we're going to end up not really reflecting our communities.
Mhm.
People will be put off by this, which will be a really serious backward step
Yeah.
for the service if we don't.
I think that's a really good challenge. So who are you thinking of in terms of the sort of category of person?
We've got some tremendous cops, linked to the point of
Yeah.
the last question, that would never embark on a degree. I'm not saying that people can't be pushed and they can't do better. I've done the Cambridge Masters in the last
Yeah.
2 years, and I never thought I'd be able to do it. So we've all got capabilities that we never thought we'd have, but I just think there are a lot of people outside the job that really could give a great deal to policing,
Yeah.
but will be put off by thinking there's no way that I'd ever succeed doing that, or I haven't got a bachelor's before I come in, or I can't get the apprentice.
Stories, yeah, that's fair, and I think the stories will be really important here. So it's showing people that this isn't about, it's not a barrier thing, this isn't a you have to have one of these to get in at all.
I think it could be, unless it's marketed.
Yeah, I think that's right, but the stories will be important. So it's the examples of people who've gone in and who've done this kind of thing later on in their policing career, or people who go in, do the apprenticeship, and it's really about the level 6 is more showing what they've achieved when they've reached the end of it. Do you see what I mean? It's not a barrier thing. It's about recognising what it is that they've learned and the skills and professional development, the understanding that they've developed through that time period. I do think you're right, there is a risk. The guys that I went to school with, I say guys, interesting, isn't it? Guys in the generic sense, both men and women, people that I went to school with would, I think, I mean, it's a few years ago to be fair, so the profile has shifted. So much more people, there are loads more people who do go, who see the opportunity here and go to university. So I can think of examples. I live a little bit in the past on this one, and I have to remind myself that actually the participation rates in university are massively different. So that is different, but I still think there's probably a kind of hardcore of people who would need to see themselves, an example like me, to think, oh yeah, okay, well maybe then, because it's not a barrier. You don't have to have a degree to do it, but this is an opportunity for you. And the social mobility people have said that to us. So the Social Mobility Commission said, we think this is a terrific opportunity. You've got to make sure that people see that opportunity and don't see it as a barrier. But you're right, it's a live risk that we have to be careful about. There's something else as well to flip it over, which is some people who see policing as not giving that kind of opportunity. So it doesn't have that sort of professional status, if you like, or opportunity for qualification, are attracted who wouldn't have been otherwise. So there is the potential for another kind of diversity as well. Yeah. Mm.
But going forward in the future, that we were asking young people to come in with a degree?
No, not necessarily, no. So you can do that. So there will be an opportunity for conversion. So we were talking earlier around relevant degrees. So you can do, if you've got a degree that's not a policing degree, you can do a graduate conversion programme. So that's one entry route. If you do a policing degree, then you can just do the bit that's about as the radio work and that kind of thing, but essentially you'll be oven ready when you finished it. And then the third route is the apprenticeship route. So you join as an apprentice and you do your qualification as part of your apprenticeship in policing. So that route, you don't have a degree when you join.
Okay, do they end up with a debt?
No.
So they're working for the police?
That's right. Yeah, it's a very attractive route in some ways. Yeah, because you've got a qualification at the end of it. Yeah. Other questions? Yes. And oh yeah, go on.
I was a commander in an area of Belfast, like we used to work pride, but some of the poorest wards in Belfast, 3% of young males in that area would attain 5 GCSEs.
Yeah.
97% of them.
Yeah.
Which means they are ineligible to join the police. And I can point to other communities where the level of education currently bars them from joining the police force. I have a real concern that we fall away from the 7th Palladian principle.
Could you say that last bit again? Sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
The 7th Palladian principle,
Yeah.
which is that the police should be representative of the community that it serves.
Mhm.
And in my humble opinion, if we turn policing into where nursing is gone, it will be a retrograde step. I absolutely agree that people should have the opportunity to develop themselves,
Mhm.
but I am really concerned that instead of focusing coppers on actually problem solving and locking bad people up, we're not necessarily going in the right direction. These are my personal observations.
Yep,
but
I understand that.
real concern. And we talked yesterday about neighbourhood policing and how that links in with helping with vulnerability this morning, countering extremism and radicalism. If we don't have a proper cross representative section of our communities, we're not going to achieve it.
Mhm. Okay, I'm going to repeat back what you said because it was quite quiet and I think they're recording the session. So a colleague was talking about how in some communities you have very low achievement rates in educational terms, and we run the risk of excluding parts of the population from policing, which risks the PDM principle about being representative, and also perhaps doesn't give us the breadth of experience and diversity that we would want. And also you would be worried about it becoming like nursing. I have to come back on that one and say, I think that all of the police officers I've met, I think, can achieve the level 6 qualification I'm talking about. So I think it's about how do we make sure that people are given the bridging that they need to come into the apprenticeship, because I think it's a fantastic opportunity. I really do. I appreciate your concern, and I hear it, I'm listening to it. I agree with you in that I would be horrified if actually it reduced participation of people from the sort of hardest pressed communities. But I think there are opportunities here. I think if we do this in the right way, I think it can make actually a positive difference. And I understand that's not your perspective. I respect that. But I do think this is a fantastic opportunity if we get it right. And if you look at the outcomes for the public, you can see that giving people these opportunities to develop themselves, it does make a positive difference. It adds something. You already have fantastic people doing amazing work, but this does add something. That's what they say themselves when they go through these kind of programs. And I think we owe it to them to give them those opportunities, to add the extra, add extra knowledge about terrorism, about vulnerability, about some of the underpinnings of what leads people to behave in these ways, which can help them in their operational world. It's not about doing esoteric, fancy stuff that's separate to policing. It's about doing stuff that really matters practically. But I respect your opinion. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
One more observation.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely with you on that. So the
Couple of
NI
minutes,
is
yeah.
doing a piece on personal resilience,
Yeah.
and it's back to, I think, a question someone asked earlier on. And it is about abstraction.
Yeah.
And it is about, one, the impact that it has on the job.
Yeah.
Because if they are doing something else, then they are not doing their core role. Two, it also then impinges upon the personal life. And there's a very difficult balance there of, you know what, I work 50, 60 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
So what more are you going to put on top
Yep.
of me? I don't want to
Yeah. And as I said at the beginning, we do recognise that it is time for us to just pause for a second to think about, can we manage the extent of the shift we're talking about in the time frame we're talking about, with everything else that's going on in the landscape. So yeah, noted that one. Had one here and one there, and then that'll be it if that's okay. Yeah, go for it.
It was similar observations really, and a concern that in the service and the college is getting confused between professionalisation and academicisation.
Mm-hmm.
Two very different things. In terms of licence to practice, we are vulnerable as an organisation because they're often our most critical roles that people don't want to go into because of lots of
Yeah.
pressure. And a lot of licence to practice puts additional burden on those individuals, which puts them off applying.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike a lot of other professions that have got a licence to practice, as a midwife, I wouldn't be suddenly transferred from a midwifery unit into A&E. We do that
Yeah.
with our staff to bridge our demand and gaps.
Yeah. Quite right.
That really impacts on our ability to move staff.
Yep.
But also, once staff are qualified, it becomes impossible for them to escape because they're so qualified and we can't replace them. So that's my concern over that one as well. And going back to the direct entry routes and various degrees, I just echo the fact that, you know, some of my colleagues that I work with are career PCs, that's all they want to do. The best PCs that I know haven't got swimming certificates, but they are awesome in terms of their communities. They're upheld
Yeah.
capacity into the community and really understand what makes people work.
Mm-hmm.
I can teach somebody who can deal with people law, but I can't deal with someone who's really good at law who can't deal with people. And we forget underarching all this that police service is about dealing with people, not about dealing with academics. You know, most of the people that we deal with, and I'll generalise, are
Mm-hmm.
very low academic achievers, time of crisis, and it takes skills and abilities to be able to
Yep.
deal with that. I'm not sure that this package will deliver that, and it also builds expectation that once everyone's got a degree, everyone's going to progress and have a career in the service. There's going to be a lot of disappointed people with degrees who are going to be PCs for the rest of their career, who could quite easily after 3 years leave with their degree that's been paid for by the college, by our forces, as opposed to doing the coming out with £60,000.
Yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in that, but yeah, very quickly, I would challenge that. I think quite often we get this sort of categorisation of, and it's been repeated a few times, this sort of academic here and operational here, people with people skills here, and academics over here. I really, I would challenge that. I mean, I appreciate you've got experience of people who've got fantastic skills and who don't have qualifications. Terrific. Well, they can have qualifications as well, though, and that's what I would say. It's not an either or for me. I can appreciate it might seem like that when it plays out in that way, but I honestly don't believe that. I don't think it is either or. I would say, and that kind of would be the key point. But entitled to your views on the other points. Yes, go for it.
Just briefly, just my last two questions
Yeah.
that came earlier around representation and legitimacy.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, the different entry routes that you talked about, has that been a quality impact assessed?
Mm-hmm.
Because the concern I would have is it would be far more attractive to take somebody on with a degree already that we don't have to pay for than to bring somebody in on apprenticeship that we would have to pay for. And so it might be quite tempting for chiefs to go for the former rather than the latter, in which case then you do stop people and it does become a barrier.
Yes, I mean the equality impact will be ongoing. We have done some assessment, but this won't be a sort of, you can't do it once. This has to be done on an ongoing and relatively continual basis. So it's interesting actually. That's not what comes out from chiefs at all. Whether they're just saying that, I don't think so. It's not what comes out from them actually, because I think they value the opportunity to bring people through in their own organisation. And have that sort of balance of practically trained by us in our organisation and given the sort of that academic element, so the sort of the professional knowledge and understanding addition from university. Yeah. It will be. Yeah.
And they can't afford it.
Yeah.
Then it's much easier to say, like the qualifications that we've asked for previously. Well, you pay for it, you come in, and then I don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, and there will be that risk, I think, but we would expect there to be a balance between those three entry routes, and that's certainly what it will say, and that's what we'll be looking to make sure of as we go forward.
Rachel, I know you want to finish, but
Yes.
I think it's just important to recognise that notwithstanding those concerns, which are perhaps based on some evidence, but we've singularly failed for decades to properly represent our communities. So we need to do something different. Professionalisation, crowd service is something that should be lauded, not feared.
Interesting. Thank you. So, behind me, there you are.
Rachel, just also need to thank you. You have had and continue to have a busy day for us today. You did the main hall thing, you've done this, you've got another one of these this afternoon, and I know you're trying to do your day job as well amongst it all. So on behalf of us all and the association,
I appreciate
thank you very much
everybody's
for your
time.
input today.
Thank you. Cheers.